Yep. And that's no signal. Is that? That's that? Yeah, it should come in.
Yeah. The worst case, the display port to VGA. We need it.
People who are interested are a subset of the active package. Right. The active package is
Oh, that time. There you go.
That's about the typical
Sorry, so hang on. Scroll down there. Set to full screen. Set to full screen.
a little legend saying with the most
I mean, I could.
yeah, most pleasingly short proof.
Yeah.
Only
Now,
300
it's over here,
years
so
later.
switch to hang on, but like, where's my controls? Right there. But does that actually control? Does it? It does. Oh. Hey, all right.
That's my bitchy pithy version.
Wait, what were you telling me to do here? Nothing else here. Nothing else here.
Okay, good.
You're good.
Cool.
And I have one last thing here. Okay, cool. One last. Those notes are lies, but are they? Yeah. That particular one is lies. It's easier to read that way. Okay. You can stand further back.
Okay, but like, okay, good. Cool.
We're good?
All right, good. All right. Am I on?
You're not currently.
Yeah. Well, dear. Well,
Yeah, it's well, dear.
wait, is this, am I on? Yeah? Hello?
That's not working.
Am I not on?
Are you on mute? You're on mute.
Oh, that's the mute. Okay. Cool. Let's see. All right. Do I have a microphone? Am I audible? Can y'all? Is it? Do I need to? Do I need to aim? All right. Can you hear me if I'm talking like this? Put it there. Okay. I didn't want to like get it. Sorry about this. Oh yeah, that's really good. Excellent sound design, Will. Good job. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Hi. I'm Will Woods, and this is Stephen Gallagher. And we are here to talk to you about RPM scriptlets and how we want to fix them. And I'm using a value of fix that's kind of like destroy, but it's not really like that.
It's pretty close to how you fix a dog.
Right, yeah. It's so just some background info, because it's like we talk about scriptlets a lot, but we don't, they're more complicated than we think they are. So, you know, it's this feature of RPM where it runs a little shell script, or it doesn't have to be shell, a lot of times it isn't. And it runs at one of several points during package installation. There's a lot of them. There's, you know, the pre-trans, pre-install, post-install, pre-uninstall, post-uninstall, post-transaction, trigger in, trigger on, post-trigger on, file trigger in, file. There's like 87 of them. There's a lot. So in practice, the reason we have them is to handle anything that RPM doesn't or can't handle on its own. This is things like running LD config after you've installed a library, adding and removing users, because RPM doesn't know about users. Sometimes they get used to like enable a freshly installed service, or to generate an SSH key, things like that. The point is, there's a lot of stuff that is currently happening in scriptlets, and we've basically used that to handle anything that isn't just laying down files. RPM does that. That's kind of a problem, because we've just made this one big bucket that we just sort of throw everything into because we don't know what else might happen. It runs everything as root, which is not super great. That, like, raise your hand if you're a Fedora packager. Are you all comfortable with the fact that anybody else in this room can execute arbitrary code on your system as root? Just like whenever.
You don't count Adam.
It's not true, because Patrick will catch me.
So
Patrick does not scale.
right. I was actually halfway to creating a nefarious package that when somebody said that, I could be like, okay, run this command. I put that on your system, ha ha ha. But then somebody was like, that's kind of illegal, maybe. So, fine, less fun. The other thing is, what do we come up with the percentage of packages? There's 77 different 7,700 packages that have scriptlets in Fedora
Yeah.
26 is what I looked at.
We came up with 17% of all packages in all binary RPMs in Fedora contain one form of scriptlet or another.
But it's like thousands of packages, which
Yeah.
means across, hundreds of packagers probably. So there's hundreds of people writing these scriptlets, and everybody maintains their own, and they're all a little bit different. And like I've seen 6 different ways that people use to create a file. Did you know that you can use install dev null to somewhere and to create an empty file? Because I didn't. This also makes another problem is when you run a scriptlet, RPM is like, I don't know, I have no way of knowing what's going to go on in here. So it runs fsync and writes makes sure everything is written to disk, and then it runs the script, and it's like, I guess I'm done. And it runs fsync again, because maybe you wrote a bunch of data, maybe you didn't. We have no way of knowing. And then it goes back to the transaction. So my laptop has 2,700 packages or something like that on it. Half of them have scriptlets.
1,400.
Yeah, 50. So it means that during the initial install or during a system upgrade, it's even worse during a system upgrade. Oh, by the way, I did all of the upgrade tools. So the reason I'm angry about this is because I'm like, why are upgrades so slow? And then I started digging and I started finding out, and I was like, oh no, this is really bad. So that's really the part where I started here. But when you're doing an upgrade, it should be that you've got, it's a bunch of packages, they have payloads. You have a big chunk of files and you want to lay those down. Except what we do is lay down this many and then stop and do a bunch of things. Then we lay down this many and stop and do a bunch of things. We stop 1,000 times during system installation, and during upgrade, 2,000 times, twice on each side, just to make sure. And usually it's useless, or so we think. But so for, underdesigned is the other thing. There's a lot that scriptlets can't do. We have no progress reporting. One of the problems we had a lot of the time with system upgrades still do is that, or actually no, it's fixed now, I think in 27. There was no output from long-running tasks like relabeling the file system. And so a lot of people would be watching the upgrade happen and install, and then it would suddenly stop. And nothing was happening. And they're like, oh no, my upgrade's blowing up or something. And they would pull the plug on their system, thus making their upgrade blow up and ruining their hard drive, and then they'd yell at me. So that's not my favorite thing to see, but it's really just a problem of like, we can't tell you what's going on because RPM doesn't have any facility for that. We can dump things to screen, but if you're not looking at the screen, you'll never know. There's no way of getting, we can't really handle exit codes, or we can, but we don't really know what to do with them. They're not super meaningful. You can't stop the transaction, really. The scriptlets don't know anything about what version of a package they're coming from or going to, which is a problem during upgrades. We're going to kind of gloss over the uses of scriptlets for system for updates and upgrades here, because my focus is on creating images. I'm working on a project called Welder, where we're working on new ways for creating file system images. So that's my main thing. So if you want to raise your hand and be like, well, what about upgrades? I'll be like, let's talk later, because I don't want to deal with it right now. There are use cases for upgrades that aren't relevant right now. Anyway, here's the example of what does this do? Here's a fun one. So here's a bug that Stephen had to fix. Yeah. What do you think that fixed? What kind of a problem do you think that fixed?
And if you can't figure it out, we can't automate it either.
What the bug was, apparently, was that if you installed Fedora Server and then installed any GUI, the display manager never came up. And if you checked, your default target was graphical target, but for some reason, it never came up. And this was the fix. It's complicated. It's really complicated. We have very strange chains of things that talk to each other, and it's extremely complex.
When you're dealing with scriptlets, they can be next to impossible to find. We stumbled across this one because someone at random ran RPM verify and discovered that file was missing.
Right. And if you want to get all this right, you have to memorize your scriptlet ordering and know when they fire and when they don't, and there will
be a test at the end of the session.
There will not be a test. Well, if you don't want there to be a test, help us fix scriptlets. So at the end, the question is that, do we actually need to do all of this stuff? Because there's so much of it. Obviously, it must be super important. And yes, there are files that we need to dynamically generate. This doesn't imply, therefore, every package must be able to run arbitrary code as root in your system during an RPM transaction. That's not, it doesn't follow. I can do a quick demo here of what we're doing with the welder stuff, and this isn't going to take long, but we have a tool that generates file system images. You give it a recipe, and it dumps out and it gives you a working file system image. And then in this example, I'm going to throw it into a QCOW2 container, boot it in KVM. No, that's not the right window. Come back, friends. In the bike, right? I think it's going to work, but it's a very short demo. Ready? Boom. I typed my password, and where it's going, it's generating, and at this point, well, this is not interesting to look at, but now we're finished.
It's
like
a video.
that 6 seconds was everything from dependency resolution to writing out the entire file system. We've now booted. It's working. Now, in that process of writing out the file system, of like doing the dep solving, writing all the content to disk, and all of that, we didn't run any scriptlets. We threw them all out. There was 1 or 2 things that we had to actually emulate, like creating users, and we're missing a couple of, the failure there is because there's a couple of missing temp files and things like that didn't get created.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
We will talk about that in a bit. But as you can, like, I'm trying to see if my web server is up, and it isn't, and then I can start the web server, and now it is up. So we absolutely can generate working systems without scriptlets. So what do we do? One of the things we had to do in being like, okay, this can work, is figuring out what they're doing in all the scriptlets. So I actually went through and read every single scriptlet in RHEL 7 and 6. I just read them all to figure out everything that they're doing. And it all comes down to these 6 things.
All done in different ways for
all done in like myriad different ways. Sometimes I found bugs in things where people were getting like their comparisons backwards and things like that, and messy and whatever. But everything came down to just one of these 6 tasks, and we have better ways of doing all of them. So this is the meat. Users and groups. We have a thing called sysusers. The system. Yes.
Do you mind if we hold questions
to
the end?
I'll talk about that in a second.
We're a little short on time.
It's a really interesting question, but yeah. So there's 6 things. Users and groups. We have a tool from systemd called sysusers, or systemd sysusers. There's a directory etc sysusers.d. You drop a config file in there, it'll create a user for you. Do that instead. That's data, it's not code.
Instead of calling user add manually.
Right. So just do not call user add. Don't run anything that adds or removes users or groups. For every case that's legal in Fedora, a sysusers.d snippet is sufficient.
And much more auditable.
Yeah, we can actually, so one of the other, to go to your point, I cannot read through scriptlets. I can get a list of all the scriptlets that are in Fedora, and I can grep through, but I can't be sure that I can tell when somebody's creating a user, because there's so many ways you can do it, or you could be like constructing usernames by interpolating variables in the middle, and I could get the usernames wrong. So if you have this file, I can read the file, and I can get it right. So do that instead. SystemCTL. Use systemd presets if you want to turn services on or off or whatever. Yeah. If you're like, I want to forcibly start this service when the package is installed, don't do that. That's not allowed. Stop doing that. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, and that's been forbidden by the packaging guidelines for quite some time now, but there are a disturbing number of packages that still call system control start at the end in their post script.
So yeah, if you're shipping a service, get a preset file, or get the presets changed so that your service is turned on when it should be turned on. If you're this is a thing that happens a lot, and maybe not so much in Fedora, but I've seen myriad examples of it. Things that create an empty file or an empty directory that they need to exist or whatever. As with users, tempfiles.d. You can create all sorts of files or whatever with the correct permissions and owner and all of that, with just like a little line that says what you need the file to be, and it'll get created at system startup for you. All done. Just a nice little line. You drop a file in etc tempfiles.d, your package name.conf, and it will happen. So tempfiles.d for those sorts of things. System-specific data like SSH keys, generating SSH keys, generating certificates, anything that's specific to the system that you're running on. We have, Stephen has a packaging policy, I guess, for how you do that. You have a one-shot service that runs the first time, or before the first time your service starts, that will create it for you. That way it doesn't happen. If I'm trying to generate...
If you have not already dropped it on disk. It's
right.
The instructions show you how to do that so you don't clobber your intentionals.
Right. There's more details on that page. It's, if I'm trying to generate a file system image and then I'm going to ship it somewhere else, I don't need a key generated then. I need it generated later. But we can't figure out what you meant because we can't read scriptlets. We just don't know what they're doing. So system config stuff like poking holes in the firewall, turning on SELINUX booleans, inserting kernel modules. Don't do that. Why? It's hard to generate images when halfway through the transaction you're trying to insert modules into my kernel. That's mean. Be nice to me. If you can think of anything where it's like, well, my service really needs to do this thing, like, talk to us about it, but most of these things are already forbidden by policy. And we should change policy or change your mind. The big one is things like ld-config and icon caches, font caches, things like that. We've got file triggers for that now. For the most part, for all the cases that I've looked at, you can use a file trigger to do that. And at the very least, that doesn't solve the fact that it's still code, but it does make it so that it's in one place, and we have one person who's in charge of making sure that happens when needed, and we don't have to go through all 20,000 packages in Fedora and fix everybody who's done it the old way when we want to do it a new way. So if you're doing any sort of cache or catalog thing where you need to run something to, after I drop in this file, I need to add it to this whatever, those sorts of tasks, file triggers, that's what you want to do. Figure out who owns the catalog and get a file trigger put in their package so that when you drop stuff down, it gets added in the right place. I'm hand-waving a lot because it's a broad category of things, but the sort of tasks that I'm talking about. It's ld-config and the icon update. If you're running a thing that ends with -update, it's probably this. That's really it. As far as we know, scriptlets, and as we've shown, scriptlets just aren't necessary in the normal functioning of the installation or upgrade stuff. Or upgrade is a different thing, but that's it.
And we're not necessarily advocating that functionality go away from RPM. What we're saying is that, at least in terms of the stuff that we want to package as a distro, we should probably forbid this and make it an exceptional case, possibly something that has to go through an approval process, because at least then we have a paper trail to know what is being done. There is one that we couldn't create, Etsy alternatives, which is an interesting case. It's kind of a cache or a catalog. It's kind of something else. We're not super sure if anybody's still actually using it. Unfortunately, it is set up by binutils. And that's part of the base system. So on your system, you have two versions of LD and Etsy alternatives switches between them. So it's in the base system. So we can't just say, don't do that anymore. Nobody uses this, because we're clearly using it. But does anyone rely on that functionality? We really don't know. And we have better ways of switching between alternate forms of software. We have software collections. We have, you can name things, give them different names. Etsy alternatives is an old solution to this problem. And we don't know if anyone's using it anymore or if it's just tradition. So please talk to us about that, because otherwise, we were going to just say, never use this again, it's terrible, why are you doing that? But we don't feel comfortable with that yet. So please talk to us so we can figure out when we can say, okay, now stop using as alternatives because nobody actually needs it. And that's really about it. Should we start taking, if there's questions? Of course, Adam is the first question.
Adam.
Simple question, stuff like sysusers.d, have the guidelines been updated for that yet?
The question is, have the guidelines been updated for things like sysusers.d?
How you create a user doing it manually using
Right. The answer is not exhaustively. I'm going to make sure that gets put on the FAD that's going to happen a month and a half from now. I will probably take that one myself.
Right. Ideally, I think there should be a simple spec macro that's just add user, sort of like you do with permission definitions that would do the right thing, and you don't have to think about it. But if you would like to help us with that, you can just drop in a file and get ahead of the game.
Very small question. I was just curious. Are things that use file triggers easier for you to handle in your welder/composer stuff than scriptlets?
Yes.
Okay, just curious.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. The question was if file triggers were easier for the welder stuff to consume or handle. And yeah, it's a lot easier to deal with one scriptlet in one place rather than 97 variations on the intent of that scriptlet in the 97 packages that ship icons or whatever.
How do you want to deal with the case where the package creates a user and then contains files owned by the user?
How do you want to deal with packages that create a user and then have files owned by that user?
I try to remember, I don't remember if RPM, I think RPM stores those as numbers rather than names, but I'm not certain of that. But basically, it would be equivalent to run sysusers.d in pre rather than running adduser in pre. I think it should be sufficient for us to just drop in the file and the user will be created when needed, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah,
So
I would
that's a
have
good
to look
point.
into that.
So no, the answer is no.
So the answer is no. Okay, well, then we'll have to fix that. So yeah, you'll still need a prescript, but we'll have a standard prescript that I can recognize that's, oh, that's what's happening.
Yeah, so either you keep a scriptlet that is just a smaller scriptlet, or RPM would have to be extended with functionality that would allow you to run a file trigger that would happen before every package.
Yes. The nice thing about switching to using a file, or yes, the suggestion was that we're going to either need a small scriptlet there, or RPM would have to be extended to handle that automatically for us using like a file trigger or something in that neighborhood. And yes, we'll have to handle that case. But the intent of moving to using the file that we can parse is that like we can, once we've all like gone through and fixed our packages so that we're all shipping the file, even if there is a scriptlet there, later we can turn that file into a different scriptlet or whatever we need to do to make the same thing happen.
Right, and again, it's about converging the content so that we only have to fix it in one place, not in 75 different packages.
Yeah, my big thing is converting like code that you have to execute and you have no idea what it intends to do, but it probably makes the right thing happen, to you tell me what you intend to happen and I'll make code make that happen for you.
On a scale from purely voluntary to a million Troy Dawsons, how would you prefer to see this implemented in the existing package set?
At the moment, this is it's a very, very good idea, but I'm not going to enforce this personally. But I would like, if you're like, no, I'm not going to do this because it's a bad idea, please talk to me. But over time, I'd like to see it like policy change to enforce these things, and over time, I would like to see scriptlets almost totally eliminated. But we're not bringing down the hammer right now.
Yeah,
or
I think
anything like that.
we've talked a little bit about having basically a 3-release plan. You know, we'll work up the new guidelines during this release process. We will make it highly recommended for the following release process, and then probably take it to FESCO and FBC to make it mandatory for the one after that.
And we want to make it like, as I was saying about making an RPM macro, we want to make these things so that they're not onerous for everybody to switch over to, and it'll take us a little time to get like guidelines on how you should do this to make it not a pain in the butt. But these are the plans that we have. Yes?
We are out of time.
Oh, are we out of time?
Please hold. Last question.
Okay, so yeah, this will be the last question, sorry.
It's a question, sorry. Do we know so you have a three-year span, basically, 3-release span. Do we know the amount of packages that are impacted with Fedora?
The question is how many packages basically are impacted in Fedora, and this is, we ran the numbers on Fedora 26, well, binary packages, it was 7,000 packages, which I don't know how many source packages that maps to, but quite a few.
And now the changes that we are wanting to do here, backward compatibility for Fedora 26 or Fedora 7.
I'm sorry?
He's asking if they're backwards compatible. If the changes we're requesting would be backwards compatible to Fedora 26.
Yes, they should.
The ones that we have suggested that are capable, or that you're able to do today, will have worked on Fedora 26. Yes.
Yeah, everything we've suggested today should work in Fedora 26.
And I think even most of them would work on Apple 7.
All right. Thank you all very much.